why does Nicaea matter for our salvation? We can also ask what was one of the driving forces for the church fathers, right? For the church to nail down so precisely why Jesus was fully God and fully man. Why did they feel that they needed to use such, sophisticated and very precise language to articulate exactly how Jesus is fully God and fully man? One of those concerns, maybe perhaps the biggest concern, is salvation. Because there is this reciprocal relationship between who Jesus is, right, the incarnation, and how we are saved and what we are meant to become in Christ. And so this concern that's driving Nicaea, underneath it all, is this concern that the Orthodox understanding of salvation, which we call theosis, right, or deification, is preserved intact. And so there are really two good famous quotes by two different church fathers to help illustrate this. The first is by Gregory the Theologian, one of the three hierarchs, good friends with St. Basil and St. Gregory of Nyssa. And he has this phrase, and it's been uttered by others, which is, "What is not assumed is not saved." That means that to whatever extent that Jesus is not fully man, right, or fully human, right, that part of humanity is not saved. And if Jesus is not fully God in some way, then we don't get to participate and become that also. And so this phrase, "what is assumed, what is not assumed is not saved," gives us this vision that the church has of how high and great the destiny and potential of the human person is. And so this is a great concern that the church fathers have, that the human person is called to this full communion in life with God. The other one is by St. Athanasius the Great, which many of us are probably familiar with, which is, "God became man so that man might become God." And in this we get the purpose of the incarnation, right? The purpose of Jesus becoming fully God and fully man living on the earth. He didn't come just to give a message or to teach us something, but rather to have a common and shared life with us, to change and transform us, for us to become like him and one with him. And I think the best illustration for this is the icon of the Mother of God, right, with child. And so the best way to think about this is that the icon of the Mother of God is the full icon, right, the full icon of the incarnation. Because the incarnation isn't complete until the human person is also fully deified. So you see this in the icon where the Mother of God is clothed with red and has blue underneath, and Christ is clothed with blue, right, and has red underneath. And the red symbolizes divinity, right, the Mother of God being clothed and becoming human, or becoming fully divine, and Jesus clothing himself in humanity, right, with the blue, becoming fully human. And so the incarnation has a purpose, right? This is what matters. And the purpose of that incarnation is for us to become fully God, just as much as Jesus is fully human. And perhaps the best analogy for this and why this is so important is the icon that's called her who is more spacious in the heavens, right? Maybe you've seen this icon where the Mother of God has her arms outstretched and Jesus as a child is within her womb. And this is an excellent image of our relationship with God, which is you can't tell, right, with any mother, where does the child end and the mother begin, right? The mother, anytime you see a pregnant woman, that is an icon of theosis, an icon of the incarnation, because the child has both the same body, right, as the mother, and also their own body. They have a shared life, one life, and yet they're also a distinct person at the same time. And this is why the mother and motherhood is always sacred, because it is an image of the life that we have in God. So this is what it means to have the full life, right, in God. Theosis, we should ask also, what does that mean, right? We throw that word around a lot. And I want to give two sort of distinctions or ways that theosis is accomplished. The first is through imitation, right? Where we sort of actively try to imitate the life and the character of Christ. This is often associated with different spiritual practices or asceticism. The other one is participation, right? This is associated with the sacraments, right? The asceticism and imitation, this is much more an active part, right? Where we have to do something very active to achieve theosis. Sacraments and participation is something a little bit more passive, where we have to receive or accept, right, what God is doing on our behalf. And so communion means both becoming like the one that we love and sharing the same life with them. And so we see this with anyone that we love. You know, if we love someone deeply, we start to maybe finish their sentences. We start to anticipate what they need. We start to act like them. You see this with, married couples who've been married a very long time. You also see this when you love someone deeply and they die and you lose them. You grieve as if you lost part of yourself. And so we can see this, image of theosis, of shared common life, of participation. We can see it in everyday relationships that we have as well. And so you can think of theosis, right, and the incarnation as a two-way street, right? That there's what God does for us, right, and what we do in response to that. And so there's God's lane. Now, God's lane, you can think of, let me give two helpful distinctions here. The first one is who Jesus is, right? In technical jargon, this would be the person of Christ. And we can also talk about what Jesus does. This would be the work of Christ, the things that Jesus does. Then there's our lane, right, which is composed of imitation and participation, right, where we're both actively trying to imitate and become like the one that we love, and participation where we are, actively receiving and accepting, right, what God is doing for us. And so the real takeaway from all of this is that orthodoxy and what Nicaea is concerned about is not creating a system of thought. It's not primarily concerned with being logical and building some sort of philosophical or theological system, but that the theology is in service to the practical lived spiritual life, right? That the real theology is like the Mother of God, an actual person who is transformed and changed, right? Who has the character and behavior of God, who's imitating God, and also who has a shared life, right? They're participating in them. And so we see that in the Mother of God. We see it in her character, her behavior, her virtue. And we see it in the icon where she's physically bearing God in her own womb, where you can't tell where God begins and the human person ends. And this is one of the primary driving motivations behind Nicaea, is there is a need to spell out exactly how Jesus is fully God and fully man, so that theosis and the spiritual life can actually be preserved, so that people can actually live holier lives, so that they can experience transformation, so that they can have communion with God. And so that's really the driving point behind Nicaea, is not to build a system of theology for its own sake, but to build theology as a tool that helps us live lives with Christ.